Welcome to the Hard-Won Wisdom Podcast with best-selling author Fawn Germer and corporate innovator Michelle Brigman. Come here weekly for career and life-changing conversations with some of today's most influential thought leaders, senior executives, and trailblazers who will share their mentoring wisdom. This podcast is brought to you by the Women's Leadership Network.
Hi, I'm Fawn Germer.
And I'm Michelle Brigman.
And this is the Hard-Won Wisdom Podcast. Today, our guest is Nia'be Mitchell, who is the VP of Member Experience for the United Healthcare Group. She has a great story with a very inspiring background that led her to an awakening, that let her realize that she was going to find some power, get some power, and use it. So welcome to the podcast, Nia'be.
Hi, Fawn. Hi, Michelle. Great to be here.
So glad to have you.
Yeah, and you're such a good friend of Michelle, so I'm really excited about this and wonder if you might be able for our listeners to tell the story of your background, because that I found so interesting.
Yeah, I would say, the most pivotal moment, as a kid growing up that truly kind of shaped my path going forward is I lost my father at 7 years old. And I was a military brat. And at the time, my father was deployed in South Korea. I was at home with my mom and my little brother when we learned of his passing. And it's something that I remember pretty vividly in my memory as a little kid. Knock on the door, my mom's in the kitchen. She was often in the kitchen. And I look through the screen door and I see these two gentlemen in military uniforms. And I immediately knew, even as a 7-year-old, that this was not a good thing, that these two gentlemen were not here with good news. And instinctively, I wanted to protect my mom. My mom is a Korean immigrant, and she met my father in Korea. And, it turns out that it wasn't good news. They were there to tell us that my father had passed away. And that really set up for me a trajectory where, I stepped into the role of being caretaker for my mom and for my brother. But then also it was really pivotal for my mom, being an immigrant. She came to the US with me and my dad when I was 2 years old. And she had been a stay-at-home mom that entire time. So just a few years stateside. And she had to make a decision. What do I do with these two little brown kids? Do I take them, back to Korea, where her entire support system at the time from a family perspective was in Korea. But she knew that for as hard as it would be for her to navigate being in the US with two small kids, she felt like it would be harder for us navigating being two little brown kids in Korea. So she stayed. And, when we are asked the question of who's your hero, a lot of times we often say our moms or our grandmothers. But for my mom, she truly is my hero because she had to make that decision and then completely, pivot. She had to get a job and go to work. She had to figure out how to, provide for these two little kids, still, what I would say, learning and enhancing her English skills. But she wanted to make sure that we were set up for success in the future. But then also really important for me as a girl, she wanted to make sure that she was an example and instilled in me, having that independence so that I wouldn't be in a similar situation as she was, where suddenly, relying on my dad, now she has to take care of herself. So that was something that she instilled in me all the way through growing up is you want to make sure you get your education so that you can get a good job so that you're always able to take care of yourself. And I was there all along the way to help her.
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious of what you remember about how she made decisions and how she processed things. And did she ever lose it when she was going through all that?
Thinking back now, we as a kid, you don't understand kind of the struggles that your parents have, because we don't see them as human. But there are some things that I had insight to just because I had to help her. I remember helping her, being at the kitchen table as an 8-year-old, writing out checks to pay the bills, to help her. I remember, if there were times, sometimes finances were hard. And if we needed to call, to make payment arrangements, I'm there being her translator. So I had insight into some of the struggles, but she never let us see potentially how hard it was for her. She always positioned it as, you know, making a plan for yourself so that you can, have success later. So she made the decision, as an example, to get her citizenship, and she would have me sit there and help her study. She's learning American history so she can take the citizenship test. And she didn't say, I'm doing this, for you. But she just said herself and set it as an example that you study, you work hard, so that you can make sure that you're successful later. So even though, by marriage, she would have been okay, and wouldn't have any risk of being deported, but she wanted to make sure that there was no risk. And she studied and she did that. I helped her study to get her driver's license because up until my father passed away, she didn't know how to drive a car. She didn't have a job. So again, she just instilled, particularly in me, as the girl, that these are key steps to take to make sure that ultimately it leads to independence.
So culturally, I'm curious because what did she teach your brother that was different?
Good question, because I even asked her that today and said, remember when we were growing up, I think particularly older sisters with younger brothers, we all feel like the younger brother got spoiled and got a pass. She would tell us both, right, reinforcing the importance of education, right, and having a good job. She didn't use the language of like career because that wasn't language that she had, frankly. And we're both doing really well now, right? That carried through with us. We both finished school. But there was a different level of responsibility that she communicated to me. Again, being independent as a woman, but then also as the older sibling, you have to take care of your little brother. And I remember having moments where I'm like, well, why is that my job? But, as an older sister, some of that is innate as well. But yeah, he definitely culturally, in Asian cultures, the son is revered. There's an expectation that when the children get older, the daughter will go to her husband, right, and be with the husband's family, and it'll be the son who will take care of, their parents when they get older. But with us, it was a little bit different because there was some of that there, definitely a different set of expectations. And, now fast forward, we both take care of her now that, she's retired and we're okay. We have to tell her all the time, we don't need any money. We're fine. And it's now our turn to take care of you, with all the sacrifices that you made.
Did she ever remarry?
So my stepdad came into my life when I was 10. And, kudos to him too, coming in to a family with 2 young kids, and he's great. They've definitely had, their ups and downs. But I'm glad that, she did not have to, go through life, alone, but she's very independent, and all through that, as I watched them and I'm growing up, she's that fierce independent is something that she carried with her, to the point of you asked me about other pivotal moments. I remember when you're a little kid, you get asked the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I remember responding that when I grow up, I want to be king. And
Love this.
someone
Love that.
corrected me, right, and said, "You mean queen?" And I said, "No, I mean king. Because if you're the queen, then that means the king is the boss of you. And so I want to be king." And my mother specifically cut in and said, "Absolutely, you can be king. You can be whatever you want to be."
Okay,
And
stop.
without skipping a beat.
That Michelle, don't you love that story?
I love it. But I sit here and I think about, just listening to your backstory, and we take for granted how powerful our behaviors are as teachers. We think whether it's parents or leaders that we have to tell people what to do,
Mm-hmm.
and we forget the message we're sending in terms of our actions. And I think going back to you saying, I want to be king, she was so adamant about, I'm going to show you this self sufficiency. I'm going to show you this independence, this curiosity, this continuous learning. And
Mm-hmm.
she was, in charge and had agency of her life. And I think that's what makes that story so beautiful, is it
Yeah.
shows up there whenever you are imagining what's possible. It's like, why not? Why not me? Why wouldn't I be king?
It really, to your point, Michelle, when you think about leadership and what makes a good leader, and you hear concepts like leadership shadow. And before there was words or language for that, as I, started my career and went through leadership training, she really showed me what it means to model behavior. There was definitely things that she said directly, like, finish your homework and you have to have your homework done before you can, go out with your friends and things like that. But being there with her along that journey, as she was establishing her independence, I mean, she truly modeled the behavior. And like I said, in some cases, because she didn't have the language for it, but I think it was more important to show it rather than telling it, because that's what we know, right? Is where you get your learning from the majority of the time, is being what you see as opposed to what you're told.
Well, she was being it. She was
Mm-hmm.
being
Yeah.
what she shared with you. There was something else, though, that you said that I want to go back to, because I think it's a really interesting takeaway. You were 7, you were 8, and you had this leadership role in the family. And I think there's a lot of young people who enter the workforce and they take for granted that they have skills and talents that they bring to the table, that they think it has to be the older, wiser, more accomplished, bigger title, that you're learning from them, and they forget how much they can offer back to others, because they are, if it could be, in today's times, right? Like, it could be video editing. It could be, it could be just all these skills that are just inherent to how they operate every day that older generations don't. And I think it's just a good reminder that age isn't a factor. It's the skill and your willingness to be a teacher.
Well, you know what? I'm curious, because when a lot of kids go through something as traumatic as what you went through, they emerge from that fearful that it's going to happen again, that now my mom's going to die or something else. And I'm kind of curious if your takeaway lesson was, I will be okay no matter what happens. Is that what she taught you?
That's what I learned. So again, she didn't say those words directly. Um, but to your point, this kind of sense of preparedness. I mean, that's the positive, right? Is learning lessons like that. You do have a sense that everything will be okay. Um, and I carry that with me. Part of that may be innate, and some of it is my lived experience. But I'm told often, in 360 reviews through friends and family, like, Nia'be's the calm one. She brings the calm. And Michelle, if you remember, I would say, okay, everybody, let's just center our chi, let's
Yes.
just take a moment. And I do think, Fawn, that some of that just came through that experience. And And, my mom just reinforcing, there's things that you do. And if you do those things, then yes, you'll be okay. Whatever it is, right? For her, it was these specific steps. But that definitely is something that I carried forward. And Michelle, going back to what you were saying, 100% agree. Throughout my career, from my very first leadership role in leading people, I had folks who were, peer from an age group perspective. I had folks who were older. I remember having my first role where I was leading other leaders, and half of the team was older than me by 15 plus years. And it was never a struggle. We didn't have any, awkwardness or any tension, related to age. And I think it's because of, me bringing forward my experience and background, but then also reinforcing that it's not about necessarily your tenure in a position. It is about, what are the experiences that you bring? What are the skill sets that you have? And how do we work together to put you in positions where you're successful, where you can lean into, those skills to do your best work? And I think that resonates no matter what age you are.
Well, so I'm going to ask a question.
Mm-hmm.
What side of the fence you stand on? Develop your strengths, solve for your gaps.
So I'm definitely develop your strengths. We, working in corporate America, reorgs and realignments, that's just kind of nature of the beast, right? And we'll talk a little bit about kind of where how I got to a VP role. But with the VP role, my team size almost tripled. And so I had new folks who were aligned to me, and, learning your new team, and they brought additional skill sets and additional functions. So as I was going through that process, I didn't realize it at the time. I probably have always been this way. But as I was, you get new people, right? You spend time with them so you can learn about them. You're assessing, right? Trying to figure out, sometimes exactly what do you do, but then also like, what do you bring, right? And it was through this recent realignment that's almost a year in the making. It'll be a year in September. I realized that I am not a fan of focusing on people's development areas. I'm very much, let's figure out what you're good at. And then what do you like? And let's bring those two things together, because I feel like when you are optimizing someone's ability to use their strengths and lean into those skills, right? They feel like they're confident, right? And that they're set up for success. And then it makes it easier to then, work on the development areas. So that's definitely my development philosophy. I did know it was a question, Michelle, until here recently. And as I'm talking to my team, I very much now am intentional about it. And it's resonating. I've moved people around, and instead of feeling nervous and anxious about being realigned to a new leader or having an enhanced scope, the feedback that I've been getting is I now feel like where I'm supposed to be. And that is the best.
Well, and as an employee, right, when you have a leader that comes to you and says, you are a freaking rock star at this skill set, right? And I see where we can take it to a whole new level. If let's talk about this role, and while it needs that skill set, I mean, you're pouring in validation, to your point, being confident, you're pouring in affirmation and validation to the employee, and it builds loyalty. That's a whole different feeling in that employee's mind than, well, let's look over your performance plan. And I see you're getting feedback that, you're really struggling with being able to tell your story with data. So I want you to go and take all of these classes. I mean, it's just like, it's a drain. And not to say, right, that you need to be aware of what your perceptions are, and you need to be aware of where your strengths and opportunities lie, or the things that you're just not as strong in. but there's other ways to solve for that, right? Like to your point, surrounding yourself with a great team who can do those things really well. And I mean, and I think that's part of what, why we work so well together.
Right. It sparks that confidence, I think, sparks something within the individual. And then as you're putting kind of the team together, it's like a puzzle piece, right?
Mm-hmm. Chess.
But chess, there you go. Exactly. And ultimately, I think, my goal is to create magic.
Well, what about for the listeners, which there will be many, who aren't the ones who get to create the magic and they're waiting for their magic, but basically they're not happy. They don't have a boss who cares if they're doing what they like. So how do you teach them to rise above, move beyond, and survive that kind of a thing so that they can find something that plays to their strengths?
Another thing that we talk a lot about, right, in leadership is mentoring. And mentoring is something that I love to do. I'll be honest with you and say that I'm not really a fan of formal mentoring programs because I don't think that they work. Part of what makes mentoring work is by it being organic. There's the mentor who wants to give, and then there's the mentee who wants to learn and grow. And when I'm mentoring someone, sometimes it's formal and sometimes it's informal. They can be in a situation like you're describing, Fawn. And what I often tell them is, it always starts with just do your best work. Within the job that you have, just do your best work, right? That's kind of, table stakes. You have to be able to deliver there. So make sure that you're getting what you need, right, to do the current job that you have to the best of your ability. And then it's about finding opportunities to, number one, speak up. The one piece of guidance that I've given throughout my entire leadership career is you have to let people know that you have an interest or that you want to learn, about a certain area. Raise your hand. And even if you're not sure exactly, what you want to do, right? And even if there's not necessarily a project right then and there that you can raise your hand for, you can still say, hey, I am interested in learning more about, this particular area or about this particular role. And that would, I think, is the starting point, because too often, right, people think, well, if I just do good work, people will see that and notice that.
That, especially women, that's their number one mistake, that they think hard work will be recognized and rewarded. And it's not. It's like everybody else is worried about what they're doing and the problems they have to deal with people. But someone who's performing, they often don't notice. How have you learned to advertise your skills and your strengths so that they do recognize and reward them?
So I'm not saying it's easy to, speak up and raise your hand, particularly if you are a closet introvert like myself. I'm on this podcast speaking to you, but I'm definitely an introvert, and I've had to learn, right, how to speak up. And it starts with, even if it's just in your team, right, or if it's one-on-one, with your leader, just saying, hey, I had this idea, or if it's just focusing on the work, right? Because you could be entry level, brand new and starting your career, focus on the work first and just talk about how you got those results, right? It could just be so simple as to start there. And then, having a conversation of, when you're getting your coaching, be an active participant in your coaching, right? It's not just about that leader giving you feedback. Being an active participant in your development is then saying, what can I do to take this to the next level? And that's how you start with highlighting what you're already doing and then starting to kind of build those connections and start to, prepare yourself to then raise your hand to say, I want to learn more or I want to do different things. And then it's just practice. People don't like to hear that, but it gets easier because you keep doing it, And that's just doing the work. There's no magic there. It's just doing it over and over again.
And you knew exactly what you wanted, right? I mean, you knew that you wanted this position.
Yeah,
You knew what you were going for. So, and I've seen people go about it a number of ways, but how did you hold them to account so you could get here? And what was your strategy to make that happen as quickly as possible? Actually, just tell the whole story.
When I came to United Healthcare, I was at a point in my career where I felt like in my prior role with my prior company, I had reached a bit of a ceiling. And also, it was time for me to learn something new. So the opportunity coming into United Healthcare was one where it's a totally different industry. So I'm definitely learning something new. But I came in an operations role, and I thought to myself, well, this is great because I know operations. So I can lean on that skill set and that background and experience while I'm learning healthcare and while I'm learning the company, frankly, because it's a large company, largest healthcare organization in the world, top 5, company. So coming in that first year, it was, the operations part came easy, if you will. I had to learn a new culture and the way that they do it here. But I was very much intentionally, and intentional is a key word for me from the beginning. Learning about the healthcare and then learning about the organization and seeing kind of where I might potentially want to go. And it became clear to me early on that I certainly had more to offer than the current role that I was starting in. But again, just like the advice I give others, I was giving it to myself: do well in the current role that you're in, right? That's first and foremost. And I did. I had multiple sites that I was responsible for, hundreds of employees that I was accountable to, and we got results, and I transformed those teams. And then I used that after the first year to say, again, I'm following my own advice. I raised my hand and I said, I'm ready to take on more. So I told my most immediate leader and, my boss's boss, made sure that they knew I'm ready to take on more. And I think that is something that as women, we don't necessarily always do. Fawn, going back to what you were saying, right? We wait for somebody to pick us, choose me, right?
Right.
And
I'm trying to please you. Do you see that?
Yes. And in this instance, I was very much just being clear that I'm ready to take on more. And hopefully that opportunity is here. But if not, I'll see where it is. And I was able to get promoted. My scope and responsibilities were expanded. And then leading up to going into 2021, you have your year-end review. Performance-wise, everything is great. And I was making progress, building relationships, influencing, expanding my network. But again, because I felt like, frankly, looking at other VPs, none of them were better than me. And I just honestly just told myself, there's no reason why I shouldn't be a VP at the level that I'm operating at. That's a role that I should have. So again, I was very much intentional.
Well, you should, and you wanted it. And I think that's
Right.
another key point, right? You knew you wanted it.
Absolutely. And going back to what I said about being an active participant in your own coaching, I let my leaders know that I'm looking for their support, right? To support me in my growth, but also, them having an awareness that I plan to be intentional about the next role. And that's what I did. I told my direct leader, told my, senior VP and my EVP. And again, your performance also speaks for you. And I had great sponsorship. So I knew that I had a lot of support. And I also wanted to make sure that I didn't take that for granted. But it was important to communicate. And that's what I'm telling, other leaders that I'm actively developing because they report to me, or whether it's a mentoring role, this intentionality, right? Putting together a plan. If you need help with putting together that plan, tap into your resources. And for me, it was about building my network because it is a big company. And, this is something that I also say a lot. So as you're speaking to folks who are early in their career or trying to figure out what's next in their career, I don't know. I didn't know, all of the functions and areas that are part of United Health Group, our parent company. But it's a very large company. And, when you get asked that question now as an adult, well, what do you want to do next? I had to figure that out. So networking and being intentional, I made a plan for myself that I would have 2 new conversations every month to learn. And, some of those folks I'm still talking to today. They're now, not just part of my network, but they're part of my board, right? My personal individual board.
Which tell other people about having those, why that's so important and what that does.
It's important because as going back to what we touched on a little bit earlier about strengths and development areas, your board is different than mentors because you're putting together folks who are supporting you in different ways, right? Some are your teachers, right? Some are your collaborators. And when you think about your board, similar to like a board of directors, right? Everyone has different backgrounds, everyone has different strengths, and your personal board helps you to keep a keen self-awareness, right? But then also as you think about your broader landscape, and my personal board has folks who are within the company, who are outside of the company. But I think it helps you to also make sure that you're staying relevant and continuing to focus on your own growth, as your career landscape changes, your life stage changes, and those types of things. So, and through building that network, I then became aware of opportunities. And then it looks like you're about to ask a question, Fawn.
I'm dying to ask it because you said something and I don't want to let it go by because we have not discussed this on this show before. And it is the fact that here you are, this really highly successful woman, and you're an introvert. And I have the perspective of having started my career and being very extroverted. I was a reporter. That's where I got my energy. But then when I became an author and I had to deal with so many people in my book lines and wanting to make sure I gave everybody a moment, then that all changed. So I'm also an introvert. And there are so many people who have to fight that. And some people don't know how to do that. So what's your success guide for introverts who want more, but don't have that comfort zone?
So when I said earlier that some of it just starts with practice, but where do you get your practice? One of the things that I did as a young leader, my first roles where I'm leading other leaders, I recognized, when I thought about who are the leaders that I admire, right? Who are the leaders that I want to emulate and learn from? They were all very charismatic speakers. And, being an introvert, I'm like, that's something that I admire in other leaders. And so I wanted to figure out, well, how do I do that for myself? And so, when I would get asked to present, even if it's on a small scale, right? Think about it, for, monthly performance reviews, right? You're looking at your metrics, you're looking at your scorecard, whatever the case may be. I would take those as opportunities to just kind of practice, right? Not just focusing on the numbers, but having a point of view, right? How did I get the numbers and kind of telling a story? And when I had new leaders that I was developing, and just kind of knowing that was a skill that it's a muscle that you have to build. I don't know if you know this, Michelle, but I would make them, instead of us sitting there looking at reports or looking at a scorecard, they all had to create a PowerPoint, and I didn't give them a template.
Mm-hmm.
And, thinking about operations, Fawn, the look on your face, that was the look that they had. There was immediate anxiety saying, aren't you going to give us a template? I'm like, no, you all know what are the KPIs that we talk about every month. You all have the reports, which is why I don't want to read the reports. We can all read the reports. We can all see them and access them. So when we're having our monthly reviews, I want to focus on how did you get the results that you achieved? And, what's your plan for the next month or the next quarter or whatever the case may be. And they were uncomfortable because not only did they have to put together the PowerPoint, and in present day, it would be Google Slides, but they had to stand up in front of us and present it. And even though it was just 5 to 8 of us in a small little conference room, with the level of anxiety that they had, but I said, but we're all friends here. It's a safe space. And so you get your practice in the safe spaces before you have to do it in front of larger audiences.
Well, you would bring them to the broader staff meeting. Like they would
bring
pass
examples, right?
And then they would come forward to the broader staff meeting and present. And that was, again, a good safe space. However, it was a larger audience and continue to get to more senior people. And it was an incredible, good developmental practice as a leader that I would highly recommend others listening to.
But a lot of introverts are very good presenters, and it doesn't bother them in the slightest. I mean, that's how I've made my living as a speaker. But it's the a lot of one-on-one that is exhausting. So
that's true. Right?
How do you fight through that?
The level of kind of intimacy. So that's another aspect to it. But before I say that, I just want to touch on that, when you have your moments where you're proud of yourself as a leader, I had one of those early folks come to me years later. I mean, it must have been 8 or so years later, where they said, Nia'be, do you remember when you made us put together PowerPoints for our results? And I said, yes. And she thanked me. She was like, that was the best thing that you ever did, to help me, think about, presenting and communication and those skills. So I love that moment. But then to your point, Fawn, about kind of the one-on-ones.
And the networking is excruciating for some of these people.
And networking too. The reason why those are harder is because there's no one else to hide behind, right? When you're in a group and you've got the talkers, well, you can just let the talkers talk and, that type of thing. And it just, what I've come to, how I think about it is that it requires a higher level of intimacy, really. And that was a lesson that I had to learn as a leader. And this, also ties back to my mom. She's the root of everything. In Asian cultures, it's very much about kind of how you present yourself. That concept of saving face, if you will. If you're struggling, you don't let people know about it. If there's stuff going on at home, you don't put your business out there. And so in my early career, I was very much like, I have a work persona, and then I have, outside of work persona. And, to the point where you looked at my desk, as a young leader, there was nothing personal on my desk. When I had the opportunity to move for a promotional opportunity, I'm meeting all new people, have a whole new team. Team dynamics were different. Culturally, it's different because it's in a totally different state. And I was like, okay, I have to build relationships. How am I going to do this? And then I was, for the first time, away from my entire support network. So the lines between work and non-work got blurred. We were starting up a new site, and that was really uncomfortable for me as an introvert. But I learned that, when it comes to building relationships, you have to have some level of intimacy. You have to let people know who you are, right? You hear the concept of, well, you want to be relatable, you want to be personable. And people get afraid of that word intimacy, but it's goes into just tapping into your human side. And so in the one-on-ones, right, it's finding those spaces to connect, right? Again, they don't have to become your best friend, right? It's not about that, but it's finding those connection points, because then that's how you grow individually, but that's also then how you build your network. And the only way to find those connection points is by having some level of, intimacy, some level of humanity, because it's not just about the work.
Well, and it's also about authenticity too, which, that those two can really clash. If you're bringing a different person to work just so you can function and it's not authentic, that can be really painful. Michelle, I didn't mean to monopolize that. I was really curious what she would say.
Oh, no, it was great. Well, I know I can ask one more question, but I know we're kind of running out of time. So maybe I'll save it. I'm going to save it for the after show. So this was awesome. I'm going to do a bit of a wrap up. I mean, I've had the privilege of working with you and knowing you both as a leader and just the human factor. And you just make the place better because of the things that you talked about, just the true compassion for people, as well as just the sense of calm because you understand, I'll say resilience. You've learned resilience and how to recognize what's really important and what's not. And it's such a great asset that people, I hope they hear it from this podcast, like how important it is. If it's not in you as a leader, make sure you've got people on your team that are bringing that sense of calm, because it just makes a world of difference. A few things, though, I want to talk about. You talked about, how to rise above to find roles that suit your strengths. You gave a couple of things. Do your best work where you are. Speak up about your goals. Talk about your results. Meet people. Repeat, practice, or I'll say rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. But then there was something else that I have a lot of notes here, but I'm going to call out one more thing. And I think it's reminder to want what's on the other side enough to face down your fears.
I talk about it as sometimes you just have to take a leap of faith. And I'm sure you all have come across this, when you hear people's stories, right? People who are successful, it is sometimes about taking that leap of faith. The unknown is uncomfortable. But for me, it's remembering that it's not completely unknown, right? Because you still bring your lived experience. You still bring, the things that you've learned. You still have skills and expertise that you have. So it's not completely unknown.
Yeah.
You may not know the exact kind of parameters of what this new opportunity is going to be. But you do know who you are and you know what you bring. And then it's thinking about, well, how do you translate that into whatever the new opportunity is? My career pivoted when, I was having one of those moments thinking about what's next. And I reached out to a leader that I admired. It was a new leader, didn't have a relationship with at the time. I do, now ongoing. But she was the first one to ask me that question that we all dread. So what do you want to do? What do you want to do next? And I articulated to her that I wanted to have a bigger impact. Wasn't sure exactly what that role was going to be. I was doing well with my team, within my department, within my function, but I described it as I wanted to have a bigger impact, both internally and externally with customers. And she came back 2-3 months later and says, I have a role that I'm going to be posting, apply for it. And again, I didn't know her that well, but I admired her as a leader. And she didn't tell me what the role was going to be. But I was like, well, if you're telling me to post for it, well, I'm going to post for it. And, when those job recs go up, there's lots of fancy words, and you're like, I don't know exactly what that is. But when she gave me the job and, it was described as go make our policies and procedures more customer friendly, I was terrified. I had no idea how I was going to do that, particularly as one person. But, I knew, again, the background and the skills that I had, and that I could use that to figure it out. And that's really what it's about.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you so much. I mean, that's that whole 50-50, 50-50. Take the job you're 50% comfortable with, take the job that's 50% you don't know what the hell you're doing. It's always a good move. Nye, thank you so much. This was just full of great nuggets for our listeners.
Really wonderful.
I'm so glad that you said yes. So thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining the Hard Won Wisdom podcast with best-selling author Fawn Germer and corporate innovator Michelle Brigman. Join us weekly for career and life-changing conversations with some of today's most influential thought leaders, senior executives, and trailblazers who will share their mentoring wisdom. This podcast is brought to you by the Women's Leadership Network. Visit hardwonwisdom.com for more on this podcast and for links to Fawn and Michelle's web pages and social media. Also, be sure to rate, subscribe, and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. We really appreciate that effort, and we'll see you next week.